December 19th, 1944. A converted French army barracks in Verdun. Walls sweating cold. Ashtrays overflowing. Coffee that tasted like it had lost the will to live. Around the long table sat the most powerful generals in the Western Allies, and not one of them looked like they'd slept any time this century. That was usually a sign that something had gone incredibly wrong. 3 days earlier, over 200,000 German soldiers had smashed straight through American lines in the Ardennes forest, a place everyone thought was too quiet, too calm, and frankly too boring for the Germans to bother with. Intelligence had been insisting for months that Germany was finished, done, cooked, stick a fork in it territory. They said there was no chance of a major offensive. They were so confident, someone probably already had the "Victory by Christmas" banners printed. Then Germany responded with its own Christmas card, artillery, tanks, and a surprise attack across an 80-mile front. A very loud reminder that "finished" is not a word you use lightly about a military that still owns thousands of armored vehicles and has a proven track record of ruining December for the rest of Europe. So now, Eisenhower had called an emergency meeting, and when the Supreme Allied Commander uses the word emergency, it's never because he's short on office supplies. Everybody in that room knew the critical issue. The Belgian town of Bastogne, a vital crossroads, was surrounded. Inside it were the 101st Airborne, holding on by grit and frozen toes. If Bastogne fell, German armor could split the Allied line, march toward Antwerp, and cause the kind of logistical chaos that keeps generals awake at night long after the war is over. Eisenhower looked around the table and asked the question that felt like it weighed the entire war. How soon can someone attack north to relieve Bastogne? Silence fell so hard, it echoed. Generals stared down at the Ardennes like it was a math test they forgot to study for. They pulled out pencils, maps, and mental calculators, trying to figure out how long it would take to disengage troops already fighting, reroute armor through snow and ice, and get everyone pointing in the same direction without starting 17 different traffic jams and at least one fistfight. Every man in that room knew the truth. The answer was going to be ugly. Days, not hours. And Bastogne didn't have days. Then George S. Patton opened his mouth. "I can attack with 2 divisions in 48 hours. The room didn't just get quiet, it went spiritually quiet. A couple of generals blinked so hard they nearly pulled a muscle. Some thought he was joking. Others assumed this was Patton being Patton, throwing out one of his trademark, logistically impossible but sounds cool promises. 48 hours? To disengage 3 divisions, pivot an entire army 90 degrees, move over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles through blizzards and roads that looked like frozen death traps, then launch a coordinated attack against dug-in German units? On paper, it was nonsense. Operationally, it was something you'd expect to hear from a man who believed coffee was a food group and sleep was propaganda. But Patton wasn't bluffing. He wasn't boasting. He was the only man in that room who had seen this attack coming, and he'd been preparing for it for 11 days. To understand how, we need to rewind to December 9th, 1944. Patton's headquarters in Nancy, France, Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's G2 intelligence chief, and a man who carried stress in the form of giant stacks of paperwork, walked into Patton's office holding enough reports to smother a mid-sized animal. Koch wasn't dramatic. He didn't shout. He didn't throw binders. He was quiet, precise, and right now very concerned. He'd been tracking German movements for months and noticed something no one else seemed eager to talk about. 15 German divisions had vanished. Not small units, not leftovers. These were full-strength divisions, including panzer units with hundreds of tanks. Gone from the line, relocated. But to where? No one at SHAEF seemed to know. And worse, no one seemed to care. SHQ's explanation was simple. They're reserve units. Nothing strange. Definitely nothing to worry about. The kind of confidence that usually appears right before something catastrophic happens. Koch didn't buy it. The Wehrmacht didn't keep 15 divisions in reserve like a teenager stockpiling snacks. That wasn't a reaction force. That was an offensive waiting to happen. He laid everything out on Patton's desk. Maps, reports, radio intercepts, civilian sightings, prisoner interrogations, patterns, lines, movements, all pointing at one place, the Ardennes forest. that thinly held region where American divisions were stretched so far you could see daylight through the defenses. "General," Koch said, "the Germans are preparing a major counteroffensive. Their target is here, the Ardennes." Patton studied the maps. 4 American divisions covering the ground of 12. Narrow roads iced over, dense forests, fog that grounded aircraft, terrain so awful that even the trees looked exhausted. SHAEF believed the Germans wouldn't attack there because it was too hard. Koch reminded Patton that the Germans had already done exactly that in 1940 and crushed France in 6 weeks. Radio traffic was rising. New units were being whispered about. Civilians reported unusual movements behind the lines. Everything screamed incoming disaster, except the official memos insisting everything was fine. Patton asked the key question, "If you're right, when does the attack come?" Koch didn't blink. "Within the next 2 weeks." Patton picked up the phone and called his superior, Omar Bradley. He laid out Koch's analysis. Bradley listened politely, then repeated the party line. "Germany was beaten, no strength left, no offensive coming, relax." Patton hung up and looked at Koch. A long moment passed. Then, "Start planning." For the next 10 days, Patton's staff worked like caffeinated ants. They developed 3 complete contingency plans, A, B, and C, each one covering every possible version of a German attack. Truck routes, fuel dumps, artillery shifts, infantry assembly points, communications rewiring, command post relocations, everything timed and calculated. Most commanders plan after the crisis hits. Patton was planning before anyone else acknowledged a crisis existed. His staff thought he'd lost his mind. Third Army was attacking in the Saar, winning, advancing, pushing Germany back. Why plan to pivot north into someone else's problem? Because Patton trusted Koch more than he trusted wishful thinking, and because Patton had a rule: if disaster strikes, you win by being the first person ready. On December 12th, he told his generals to be ready to disengage at a moment's notice. He didn't explain. He just said it might happen. They didn't understand, but they trusted him. By December 15th, Third Army was the only American force with contingency plans for a German offensive in the Ardennes. Everyone else was convinced the war was basically over. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, Germany delivered its rebuttal in the form of thousands of artillery shells. The Ardennes exploded. 3 German armies crashed into 4 thinly spread American divisions. The Americans were outnumbered 4-1. Communications collapsed. Units disappeared into the fog. The 106th Infantry Division, sent to the Ardennes for a quiet introduction to combat, was effectively destroyed. 2 regiments surrendered, the largest American mass surrender in Europe. At SHAEF, the first reports were dismissed as a local counterattack. Hours later, they still couldn't agree on what was happening, but at Third Army headquarters, Patton had already called for Koch. "You were right," he said. "What's their objective?" Koch pointed at the map. "Bastogne, then Antwerp." "Exactly as predicted." "Get me General Gaffey," Patton said. "We're executing the contingency plans." While everyone else was still figuring out the size of the disaster, Patton was already turning his army. Which brings us back to Verdun, December 19th. Eisenhower asked how soon anyone could attack north. The room froze. Patton gave his answer, 48 hours. And the disbelief was so strong you could feel it trying to leave the building. Eisenhower pushed him. If Patton failed, the 101st Airborne died. "Ike," Patton said, "I've already given the orders. Third Army is disengaging now. I've had contingency plans prepared for 11 days. Eisenhower stared at him, then nodded. "All right, George, get moving." Patton left the room and made one phone call. "Play ball." That phrase triggered the entire army into motion. Orders rippled through Third Army like electricity. Units pivoted north. Supply lines redirected. Fuel dumps moved. Artillery repositioned. Everything changed course. Over 133,000 vehicles moved out. Tanks, trucks, jeeps, ambulances, in snow, in ice, through fog, through traffic jams that could have made a grown man cry. Military police stood at intersections for hours, waving vehicles through with frozen hands, directing the controlled chaos of an entire army turning 90 degrees in 2 days. Engines froze. Men froze. Roads turned into ice chutes. None of it stopped the movement. By December 21st, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division were already in position south of Bastogne, 100 miles in under 48 hours. On December 22nd, 3rd Army attacked north. The fighting was brutal. Every mile toward Bastogne felt like someone had booby-trapped the landscape with misery. Tanks fought tanks in frozen fields where engines idled non-stop to keep from dying in the cold. Infantry slogged through forests so dense they could barely see the man next to them. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held on by sheer spite. They were surrounded, outgunned, freezing, and short on nearly everything except attitude. When the Germans demanded their surrender, Brigadier General McAuliffe responded with the single greatest one-word morale booster in American military history: nuts! It was the polite version. The actual sentiment was far less printable. December 26th, 4:50 p.m., First Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding Cobra King, broke through the final German positions near Assenois and linked up with the 101st Airborne. Bastogne was relieved. Patton called Eisenhower. "We're through to Bastogne." No bragging, no theatrics. Just the simple confirmation that he'd done what no one else thought was possible. The corridor was narrow and constantly attacked, but 3rd Army held it open. Supplies poured into Bastogne: ammo, food, medicine, hope. The Battle of the Bulge dragged on for another month. Over 19,000 Americans died. Nearly 50,000 were wounded. It was the bloodiest battle the U.S. Army fought in World War II. But without Patton's movement, without Koch's analysis, the numbers would have been far worse. After the war, Allied interrogators asked captured German commanders about their offensive. Germany had expected to reach the Meuse in 4 days, take Antwerp in 2 weeks, and break the Allied line. They hadn't expected George S. Patton to hit them faster than their own planners thought possible. General Blumentritt called Patton the most aggressive panzer general among the Allies. Von Manteuffel went further. "We knew Patton would react quickly. We did not know he had prepared for our attack. When his counteroffensive hit us, we knew someone on the American side had anticipated us exactly. That someone was Oscar Koch." George Patton received no special decoration for Bastogne, no saved Christmas medal, no ribbon for performed a logistical miracle in freezing weather. History largely ignored the 11 days of preparation that made it possible. Oscar Koch, the man who saw the offensive coming, remained almost unknown outside intelligence circles. But inside the profession, the lesson became legendary. Intelligence only matters if someone believes it. Preparation only works if leaders trust their planners more than they trust their assumptions. SHAEF had believed the war was nearly over, so they forced the evidence to match the story. Koch didn't assume. He analyzed. Patton didn't dismiss. He listened. And when the storm hit, Patton was the only general ready. Not because he was lucky, not because he was reckless, but because he did the one thing no one else dared. He prepared for the truth instead of the version that made him comfortable. And in war, that can be the difference between disaster and victory, between losing an army and saving a front.